From the combined newsrooms of KARK4 and Fox 16, breaking news coverage.
And hello to you. I'm Mitch McCoy. We apologize for the technical issues. We are following breaking news, an absolutely unprecedented event unfolding in our nation's history. A lockdown issued at the United States Capitol after protesters have stormed the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. These have been pictures that we've been watching now for some time as we know that there is an unprecedented amount of law enforcement responding right now to the U.S. Capitol. A lockdown has been issued. NBC News reporting moments ago that members of Congress have been handed gas masks at the Capitol. We have been seeing photos circulating across social media of what appears to be protesters on the ground at gunpoint by U.S. Capitol police officers in what has become an unprecedented event in our nation's history. You can see protesters remain on the steps of the Capitol at this very hour, as we know that a curfew has been issued in the Washington, D.C. area, and there is now this siege on the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. It is unknown at this hour how many people are inside the U.S. Capitol, but we know that protesters are inside the building at this hour, and we have seen photos of U.S. Capitol police officers holding protesters at gunpoint inside the U.S. Capitol. There is one photo of protesters outside the House chamber, U.S. Capitol police officers heavily armed, holding these protesters at gunpoint. Members of Congress, they have been handed gas masks, as we now know that there is a shelter in place issued in the U.S. Capitol, and there is now a curfew set for the Washington, D.C. area. There are videos being circulated right now across social media. A reporter from the Huffington Post showing it looks to be members of Congress piled up on the second floor of the House, on the House chambers and the floor there. And you see Capitol police officers barricading a door, holding guns, blocking protesters from entering the House floor. So an absolutely unprecedented event unfolding in our nation's Capitol at this very hour. I'm looking right now. This is more video coming in from our crews on the ground. This is coming in via satellite. You can only imagine there are tons of people in this area, so give it a moment for the video to catch up and the signal to catch up. But you see what appears to be protesters that remain on the front steps of the state capitol there in Washington, D.C. We know law enforcement is responding to this area at this hour, as we know that the Electoral College vote was happening at this time. So if you're just joining us, good afternoon to you. I'm Mitch McCoy. We are following breaking news at this hour. The U.S. Capitol is under siege by protesters. Both the House and the Senate have been evacuated as protesters have entered the U.S. Capitol building in Washington, D.C. Let's go back to those aerial photos right now from a helicopter. You see not only protesters on the inside of the Capitol, but you can see that they're also on the outside of the Capitol there on the front steps. For some time, we have seen protesters along the front of the Capitol. There's a driveway there in front that members of Congress will be dropped off. It's usually a heavy guarded area, and at some point protesters were able to take some of the barricades that were up by bicycle police officers at the U.S. Capitol, and they were able to rush the steps. The Capitol police officers maintained their ground for some time, preventing protesters from entering the steps of the Capitol. They were doing a very good job. At some point, Capitol police officers lost their footing, and protesters were able to get on the front steps of the U.S. Capitol. At some point, they were able to enter the U.S. Capitol. And so this is where we're at now. We're at this point where protesters are both in the U.S. Capitol and they are on the outside of the U.S. Capitol. Let me show you a tweet moments ago from President Donald Trump. President Donald Trump saying, quote, "Please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They are truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful." That was a tweet coming in moments ago from President Donald Trump. He tweeted that at 1:38, this after protesters had taken the U.S. Capitol. Truly an unprecedented event unfolding in our nation's history. We also know that Representative Steve Womack is tweeting as well. Representative Steve Womack tweeting this at about 1:30 as protesters were taking the Capitol. "Every American has the right to peacefully protest, but the violence we are witnessing on the U.S. Capitol grounds is unacceptable. Attacking property and the brave men and women of the Capitol Police must stop. I strongly condemn these acts. Our nation is better than this." That coming in from Representative Steve Womack just about 1:30 today. We are seeing, and I'm trying to get an idea of what kind of flag that is flying outside the U.S. Capitol. That looks to be an American flag flying outside as protesters have taken the steps and they have taken the inside of the Capitol in Washington, D.C. The House and the Senate both evacuated as we are seeing this unprecedented event unfold in our nation's history. As I was telling you a little while ago, we were hearing from Representative Steve Womack. We've heard through a tweet from President Trump, and we are now hearing from Senator Tom Cotton. Senator Tom Cotton also tweeting a little while ago, condemning the actions at the U.S. Capitol. Let's bring up his tweet. Senator Tom Cotton saying, "This violence is unacceptable and needs to be met with the full force of the law. God bless the Capitol Police who are keeping us safe." That coming in from U.S. Senator Tom Cotton at 1:36. Again, this all happening as we are seeing these protesters take the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. This is something we've been watching now for the better part of, a half hour. Just to reset what we know at this point, we know that these protesters have been outside of the Capitol for some time, and the U.S. Capitol police officers, they were able to maintain their pose. We see this a lot whenever there are protesters. We see them, at least law enforcement, they will create some kind of line to try and create a barrier between whatever they're trying to protect and ultimately that line. So that is what we saw, at least here in Little Rock, with the Arkansas State Police when they were protecting the Capitol several months ago during the unrest here in Arkansas. That is what U.S. Capitol police officers were doing today. They had created that line, that barrier, with bicycles. At some point, protesters were able to overtake the bicycle police officers, and then at some point they were able to get on the steps of the Capitol. The U.S. Capitol police officers, they were able to maintain a pretty good line between the protesters and the U.S. Capitol doors for about a half hour, and then at some point we saw some movement there between Capitol police officers and protesters. Protesters eventually were able to overtake those officers on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. And we now know that these protesters were able to get inside the U.S. Capitol, and that is what we're seeing right now. NBC News is reporting that several people have been injured in this siege of the U.S. Capitol, and they are now being treated for their injuries as members of Congress have been handed gas masks. Both the House and the Senate have been evacuated as we see this unprecedented event unfold in the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. It's important to note here that we have just moments ago learned that the mayor of Washington, D.C., they have issued a curfew for tonight, ordering people off of the streets, and that curfew goes into effect at 6 p.m. tonight, and that curfew is until tomorrow morning at 6 a.m. So a lot to unpack here and a lot to monitor as we continue to watch these live pictures from Washington, D.C., and we start to hear from representatives here in Arkansas as well. I want to welcome in my colleague, Mallory Brooks. She has also been monitoring this situation from the newsroom at this very hour. Mallory, boy, these live pictures from the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. We're seeing these photos of U.S. Capitol police officers hold people at gunpoint outside of the House chambers. Certainly an unprecedented event.
Unbelievable, like something we've never seen in our lifetime. We are getting images as we speak. President Trump has asked his supporters via Twitter to support police, to be peaceful, to end the violence that's happening there. And we continue to see people as they are inside the Capitol. Mitch, I'm not sure if you've talked about this, but someone sitting in the Senate chamber, sitting up there. We have seen, like you said, several people that have been injured. They evacuated the House chamber, and they do have a lot of those members wearing gas masks. They are ducking, they are going to safe places. And you're hearing House members that are calling their family members and saying, we are okay, because you can understand the concern of what's happening right now. Protesters, as you said, on the Senate floor right now, law enforcement with guns drawn, and police have been trying to hold back protesters, as we're seeing in real time in many of these images. Something we've just learned in the last few minutes is police are actually using chains to try to keep some of those protesters out of the way. Again, all of this coming in just in the past few minutes. But unbelievable images that we're seeing there. And what we're really trying to learn right now is law enforcement, the National Guard, will they be called in at this point, Mitch?
Well, and that certainly is what the law enforcement is trying to do. They, we're seeing, as you mentioned, the chains be used to try and assist here. What law enforcement likely also trying to do, Mal, is they're trying to create some kind of barrier with between them and what they're trying to protect. And right now, that is protecting the U.S. Capitol. And so what we're seeing right now is law enforcement do exactly that. They're doing everything they possibly can to create a barrier between them and the protesters outside. So that's why we are seeing photos right now of Capitol police officers holding people at gunpoint outside the House chamber there. These police officers heavily armed. So at this point, you can only imagine that they're trying to clear the U.S. Capitol building of any protesters to try and regain some kind of control inside the Capitol and basically reform a perimeter there at the Capitol.
Absolutely, Mitch. The very latest we're hearing from President Trump. In his latest tweet, President Trump asked his supporters to be peaceful, asserting, "We are the party of law and order," as protesters continue to carry out the unprecedented actions that are happening at the U.S. Capitol right now. The president is back at the White House. Officials say he is monitoring his supporters' siege of the U.S. Capitol. At this point, no plans from the president to speak, but we are certainly waiting for that if it were to happen, Mitch.
So, and this was a tweet that the president sent out at about 1:30, which is probably a good time frame of when this event started, and he said, "Please support our Capitol Police and law enforcement. They're truly on the side of our country. Stay peaceful." That was a tweet that President Trump put out a little while ago, as we're starting to see, and if we can, I don't know if, I think the newsroom is listening to us, Mallory. If we can somehow get a shot from NBC, we are seeing protesters on the Senate floor in Washington. If we can get that shot, that would be great. On NBC-C, if we can get that shot, as we are now learning that protesters have taken the floor of the U.S. Senate.
And Mitch, the very latest we have just learned from NBC, President-elect Biden is expected to make a statement soon. We will be hearing from him in just a few moments. But what we do expect to see from NBC in just a moment that you will see is protesters on the floor of the Senate. We saw them sitting in the Senate chambers, and many of them dressed up. And you also see people in the house. You see images of them ducked with gas chambers on, contacting their family, saying, "I'm okay."
Well, we have heard from Representative Steve Womack. We've also heard from U.S. Senator Tom Cotton, both condemning these actions here at the U.S. Capitol, as we're seeing protesters enter the Capitol, and we are now seeing photos and videos of protesters inside the Senate. Again, right now, law enforcement likely trying to reestablish that barrier between them and the U.S. Capitol building, and then at that point try and clear out the U.S. Capitol of any protesters. And you know, what an absolutely unprecedented event, Mallory. You know, we saw earlier today democracy at work. We saw people at the Arkansas Capitol. They were practicing their free speech. Everything was peaceful. And we see these events today at the U.S. Capitol. Nothing but astonishing and just very, very hard and difficult to watch as we see protesters on the Senate floor of the United States Capitol.
Absolutely, Mitch. And you know, you are hearing, like you said, there were tweets going out. You are seeing so many Republicans, you are seeing so many big leaders condemning this. So many Republican leaders are saying this is not the way. Violence is not the answer. Please back down, get out. This is not the way. This is not going to end well. We are seeing those tweets as they come in. But you know, it started earlier today. Supporters were on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. They tore down 4 layers of security. This started just after noon, that all of it kind of escalated. 4 layers of security fencing attempting to occupy the building. They fought federal police and they made it their way. And the U.S. Capitol was put on lockdown quickly. Everyone was sheltered in place. And now you're seeing them on the floor of the Senate. I believe we do have that, or do we have that image yet?
We don't have that image yet. The newsroom is working to get that for us. We have a ground shot from outside the Capitol, but I can't tell where that's at. It looks like that might be the driveway of the U.S. Capitol, because we know that there's a very heavily guarded roadway in front of the U.S. Capitol. And that is usually an area that you don't see a lot of foot traffic, even vehicular traffic. You will see members of Congress there as well being dropped off. And so at this point, we have not seen that. But again, if we can, we're now learning from News Nation. We're now learning from News Nation that members of the House have been told to put on their gas masks. And that is coming from our News Nation crews there on the ground, as we learn at this point that it's very likely that tear gas might get deployed if they're being told to put on gas masks. And at this point, we are trying to
and Mitch, we're hearing from a look there outside. Jesse has kind of been keeping us updated as she was inside as all of this was happening. She started tweeting around 1:15 that the U.S. Capitol was on lockdown, the Senate recessed, shelter in place. She also mentioned, as you said, the mayor has ordered a 6 p.m. curfew with all of this happening. She just tweeted images, hopefully we can pull up at some point, of scenes from the U.S. Capitol under siege. Unbelievable scenes there as people are on the ground, face down on the ground, with officers with their guns out. This is unlike anything we've seen, Mitch.
It isn't. And talk about a day that has been planned for some time. Let's see if we can. I'm not sure if we have. Okay, we do not have audio from there. I thought they were talking to somebody. You were talking about those the tweets. Let's try and bring that up for folks right now. And if we can, here is. Okay, here we go. So here are the tweets that Mallory Brooks was just talking about. These are the photos. It's like this is Getty Images here of what you were saying, and you see U.S. Capitol police officers doing everything they can to barricade that door. And Mallory, if you look, it looks like they've moved a large piece of furniture, blocking protesters from getting onto. This might be the House.
Unbelievable images there. And as you continue to scroll through, there's one where you see people on the ground. You can see people ducking as they're trying to run out of the chambers. There's one where you see people on the ground, face down, if you go over right there with officers there. Unbelievable images that we're seeing, Mitch.
Heavily armed police officers, of course, because they don't know what is happening. Obviously, a siege of the U.S. Capitol. Law enforcement doing what they can to bring some kind of law and order back to the backbone of American politics.
And I want to bring the latest update now from NBC News. And NBC News has said as supporters have stormed the U.S. Capitol building, here's just the very latest of what we know. Take a look at that, by the way. You see a protester hanging there in the chambers. Here's what we know from NBC. Process for counting electoral college votes has been suspended. House chambers doors have been barricaded at this time. Vice President Pence has been ushered to a secure location. That curfew, like we said, begins at 6 p.m. We are expected to hear from President-elect Biden very soon on this issue, but that's the very latest from right now from NBC, Mitch.
As we're looking at okay, real quick, want to get to a report from CNN. CNN is reporting that a woman has been shot on the Capitol grounds. We don't know where this was at. This is according to CNN, that that woman has been rushed to the hospital in critical condition after being shot in the chest on the Capitol grounds. No other details have been provided just yet. This is according to CNN and has not been independently confirmed by us or News Nation just yet. As we're looking at this unprecedented photo from the inside, this might be the Senate or the House.
In an update to what you just said, MSNBC now reporting that a woman bleeding heavily was wheeled away from the U.S. Capitol as CPR was performing emergency medical personnel. Again, that tweet just coming in from MSNBC in the past few minutes. Just like you just said, that CNN was reporting. Unbelievable. We're seeing this happen in real time. Like we said, nothing in our lifetime has ever been like this, Mitch.
It really hasn't. And we're looking at, and I'm trying to see if we have, I'm not sure what happened well, that shot just went down as we look at that Capitol shot. I'm trying to see, we have this board that's connected to our newsroom, and they can feed us live pictures. But it looks like right now that is the shot that we have. Mallory, you know, we were looking at that aerial shot earlier, and that aerial shot looked to basically you had protesters on the front steps, and then it looked like at that point, you know, it kind of faded off. It wasn't as dense. From this ground shot, it looks like you have protesters for quite some ways. I don't know if you've had protesters back up and go on the other side of the Capitol grounds or what. But this is certainly a situation that has now transpired into the Washington, D.C. area. And this is why you now have Washington, D.C. officials, not federal officials, but city officials, start assisting in this.
And if you're just tuning in here in Arkansas earlier today, and still happening right now, we had many protesters, probably 300 or 400 were on the steps of the state capitol. Many of them are still there. That was a completely peaceful protest. Nothing has happened at our capitol here in Arkansas. We'll hear much more from protesters in Arkansas coming up in our later newscast. What we're taking a look at right now is in D.C., unprecedented images. As Mitch just mentioned, CNN and MSNBC reporting a woman that was being wheeled away heavily bleeding. They were performing CPR, being wheeled away from the Capitol. We do know several people have been injured. But we are now hearing from CNN that someone has been shot, apparently.
This is, Mallory, just to set the scene, this is video from that protest earlier today in Arkansas. Completely peaceful, no issues at all. We actually saw law enforcement speaking with protesters out at the rally in Arkansas. No issues at all. And then you take what is now unfolding at the U.S. Capitol, and you can't really even compare the two, as we now know that protesters have taken the U.S. Capitol. I do want to get to Mallory. It looks like we're hearing from Senator John Boozman. The senator just tweeted moments ago, and Mallory, you're seeing that tweet as well, this tweet coming in at 2:11.
That's right. The violence and destruction taking place at the Capitol, unacceptable and must cease. That coming from Senator John Boozman. We also heard about an hour ago from Senator Tom Cotton. He tweeted, "This violence is unacceptable and needs to be met with the full force of the law. God bless the Capitol Police who are keeping us safe." And we're seeing this trend. We're seeing every Republican leader condemning this and saying that this must end. This has to come to an end as we see it continue in the Capitol. As we mentioned earlier, Mitch, the question is, does the National Guard come in? At what point does the National Guard get involved? We're still waiting to hear from that from NBC.
You know, you can only imagine at this point that you have, we know the vice president is safe. The vice president is in a safe spot. Of course, he was he was presiding over the Electoral College vote. And you likely have President Trump, and he is probably watching these live pictures from the Situation Room, one might imagine. You know, it would be interesting to see what's happening at the White House, given the fact that the U.S. Capitol has been breached. You can only imagine that the White House is in some kind of precautionary mode as well. And I'm trying to see, those are American flags. I'm trying to make out what that other flag is between the American flags. I can't tell what that flag is.
And Mitch, I just want to one more time, if people are just tuning in, update with the very latest from NBC on what's happening as supporters have stormed the U.S. Capitol building. The House chamber doors have been barricaded. As you said, Vice President Pence has been moved to a secure location. The constitutionally mandated process for counting electoral college votes obviously suspended, and it will be very interesting to see what happens from here. But you're taking a look at something that is unprecedented. We've never seen anything like this before.
And we can confirm from News Nation that one person has been shot at the U.S. Capitol during these protests. You know, at this point, we don't have any other information. We know that one person has been shot. We know that that person has been rushed to a hospital, but at this point, Mallory, anything else would be premature to report at this hour, as we now know that one person has been shot at the U.S. Capitol. That coming from News Nation, our Nexstar, our corporate newscast that conducts every night. One person shot, condition unknown.
Again, we are seeing some of these images roll in. We looked at them earlier, Mitch. People on the ground face down with heavily armed law enforcement there. You're seeing images from the Senate chambers of protesters that have taken over the Senate chambers, while other senators are trying to duck out and run out to safety at this time. You mentioned earlier House members have been given gas masks to wear, so we don't know if tear gas will be used at some point.
We're looking at the photos coming in from photographers who are inside the U.S. Capitol, and you look at the photos of individuals taking the Senate floor. This photo coming in, just absolutely unbelievable. There at the U.S. Capitol, we're looking at that looks like a lawmaker being rushed off. You see a U.S. Capitol police officer at the bottom left, helping during that evacuation process, that shelter in place. But, you know, Mallory, this photo right here speaks 1,000 words to me, at least personally.
Absolutely. You see a standoff that's happening right there. You see furniture that has been moved to protect the doors, to keep people from coming in. You never imagined you would see something like this, Mitch.
At the U.S. Capitol.
At the U.S. Capitol.
You know, it would be interesting to see. I mean, this day has been coming for so long. And you have seen within the last week or so a ramped up effort. You throw in the election that happened in Georgia just yesterday, and the dynamics of our country is so politically divided. And you see what has now been ramped up. And here we are at the U.S. Capitol, and you called it best, Mal. This is a standoff between U.S. Capitol police officers and protesters, furniture essentially barricading themselves inside, and you have U.S. Capitol police officers with weapons drawn at the U.S. Capitol.
And you know, we talked earlier briefly about Arkansas protesters. Arkansas protesters stayed very peaceful, nothing happened. But we are seeing in other parts of the country, we've learned that in Kansas, the Capitol Bureau in Kansas confirms protesters have breached the Kansas State House. So there is more unrest in other parts of the country happening, and certainly just very concerning images we're seeing there from D.C.
Want to bring in these live pictures from Washington, D.C. This looks to be right outside the U.S. Capitol. You still have protesters on the front steps of the Capitol, and it looks like you don't see a lot of law enforcement, but it would certainly appear that you have law enforcement still inside, and they're doing what they can to regain control of the U.S. Capitol. As we're learning, one person has been shot during these protests. CNN is reporting that that person, it was a woman, that is in critical condition. We have not independently been able to confirm that.
And Mitch, I'm going to step away, work on some of the later broadcasts so we can keep you updated. But Mitch will keep you updated. Thank you for your coverage of this as we just watch pretty concerning images in real time.
Well, and Mallory Brooks, want to thank you for your help as we cover this breaking news situation and an unprecedented event unfolding in our nation's capital. Mallory Brooks, thank you. We'll see you at 4 p.m. on KARK News at 4. You can only imagine that the news at 4 is going to be one for the record book as well, as we watch this historic event unfold in the nation's capital. You see protesters there. You see emergency lights also in the distance, as we see looks like Trump flags flying there in the distance. And we see our photographer also be moving around. You can only imagine that during a breaking news event like this, our photographers are trying to stay safe, and they certainly do not want to interfere with this ongoing police operation. But at this point, you do have this breaking news situation unfold at the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. Protesters remain on the steps. You know, excuse me, one of my thoughts here, and you know, I noticed this just as the shot is getting darker. It's 3:30, coming up on 3:38 on the East Coast. And, you know, this is certainly not a situation that law enforcement is going to want to be dealing with when night falls. That is going to be certainly an event that law enforcement will not want to have on their hands. So they're going to probably do everything they can to try and get and regain control of the U.S. Capitol as quickly as they can. And I want to see if the newsroom can, if there's a way to bring up these photos from the Senate floor. We're seeing photos now coming out through NBC. Let me know when that is available. We are seeing tweets now come in from Representative Rick Crawford, and this is his tweet right here. He says, the actions by those who are lawlessly and forcibly entering the Capitol are disgraceful and reprehensible. I condemn those whose actions are endangering the Capitol Hill Police, other law enforcement personnel, members, staff, and employees of the Capitol. And as we see these tweets come in, I want to remind you that we are in a breaking news mode at this very hour. We want to reset what we know right now. At approximately 1:15 Central Time, protesters managed to take the U.S. Capitol. They took siege of it, and we saw people, protesters, inside the Senate floor. We have seen protesters also inside. Let me bring up this right here. This photo right here coming in from Getty Images. You see law enforcement there in a virtual standoff with protesters. You see Capitol police officers with their weapons drawn, and they have created a barricade between them and on the other side of the door, trying to keep control of the U.S. Capitol. These photos are coming in as we speak here because of photographers that are inside the Capitol. This is another photo coming in. You see U.S. Capitol police officers holding protesters at gunpoint outside. And this photo is outside of the House chambers. And so this photo was captured again by Getty Images. As we learn, protesters have entered the U.S. Capitol. A lockdown has been issued, and we're seeing U.S. Capitol police officers try and regain control of the U.S. Capitol at this hour. We can confirm that one person has been shot. CNN is reporting that it is a woman that has been shot, and she has been rushed to a hospital in critical condition. News Nation, our parent newscast, has not been able to confirm that just yet. As we continue to monitor these live pictures here of an absolutely historic day in the U.S., we can confirm that the Electoral College, of course, is in recess as the House and Senate Electoral College is in recess as we wait to try and get an update on what's next. But we do know that several people have been injured. You know, I'm watching these live pictures with you all as we learn of one person being shot at the U.S. Capitol. And you can only imagine what's next as night falls and as we see protesters take siege of the U.S. Capitol, because protesters have stormed the building. We are seeing photos now of protesters, and again, if there are folks in the newsroom, if we can, we have protesters in the rotunda of the U.S. Capitol. We're working on getting we have some new photos coming in. Stand by, folks, as we try to get these new photos. They are just coming in here. As we also know that the District of Columbia, the D.C. area, there is a curfew beginning at 6 a.m. These photos are coming in right now, and if someone, and I'm seeing it on, I'm seeing it on Teams, but is there a place that this is available on the broadcast computer? Okay. So as we're looking at these, we have some new photos coming in. Oh, we have some new photos coming in, but as those come up, we continue to look at these live pictures from the U.S. Capitol. Their protesters are still on the streets there in Washington, D.C. You know, one at this point can only imagine what could happen when night falls. I mean, and that is one of those things that law enforcement's probably also looking at as they try and regain control, and likely at this point try and get whoever's in the Capitol out of the Capitol and then reestablish some kind of perimeter. But again, and Ashley Fugo, one of our producers, is in here. If there's a way we can get a shot of what's on router 1 on NBCD, I believe that's what's happening on the Senate floor right now. That would be greatly appreciated. At this point, we are, and Nexstar News Nation is confirming at this point that one person has been shot at the U.S. Capitol on the grounds there. CNN is reporting a woman has been taken to the hospital and is in critical condition. I want to take a moment and welcome in Fox 16 anchor Donna Terrell. Donna Terrell has been also monitoring this breaking news story from our newsroom as we started seeing all of these pictures come in. Donna, it is, I want to say it's good to see you, but gosh, talk about unprecedented circumstances unfolding at the U.S. Capitol.
Very much so. You know, I've been watching breaking news here, and I just got this alert. Trump has ordered the National Guard to the Capitol after his supporters breached barricades and broke windows to enter the building, prompting the lockdown and, of course, lawmakers having to evacuate. And you just mentioned that one person was shot. I will tell you, this is something we have never, ever seen before. Today, just expected to be, well, I was going to say ceremonial, not so much. Typically, when lawmakers approve the Electoral College, you know, it is ceremonial. Procedural, if you will, but that was not expected to be the case today, but no one really expected to see this. Granted, we were expecting protests, but to have protesters actually breach Statutory Hall, I have seen pictures, and Mitch, I know you've reported on this, where we've actually seen protesters on the Senate floor. And protesters facing armed guards trying to get on the House floor. This has just been something that is so unusual, and I don't know about you, Mitch, but in some ways a little scary.
Yeah.
You know, it's just something that you don't expect, and like you said, what will happen when night falls? As you mentioned, one person has been shot. We don't know the condition of that person at this time, but hopefully there won't be any other casualties to what's happening there. But as you look at the massive crowds, it doesn't seem to be thinning out.
No, it does not. And Mike Pence, Vice President Mike Pence, has just tweeted. He has just tweeted, "The violence and destruction taking place at the U.S. Capitol must stop now. Anyone involved must respect law enforcement officers and immediately leave the building." That is from Vice President Mike Pence. "The violence and destruction taking place at the U.S. Capitol must stop, and it must stop now. Anyone involved must respect law enforcement officers and immediately leave the building. He goes on to say, peaceful protest is the right of every American, but this attack on our Capitol will not be tolerated, and those involved will be prosecuted to the fullest extent of the law. That tweet coming in just moments ago from the U.S. Vice President Mike Pence.
And the President of the United States, you may have mentioned this, so if I mean, I'm just jumping in
You're just
here,
jumping
so,
in. It's okay.
Some of the things, these are just things that I have, but President Trump, I am asking for everyone at the U.S. Capitol to remain peaceful, no violence. Remember, we are the party of law and order. Respect the law and our great men and women in blue. Thank you. That from President Trump. It's interesting coming at this time, considering that there has been violence and there have been breaches going on at the nation's capital.
I apologize. We were taking a shot of the NBC has a camera inside the Senate floor, and that was video from moments ago where individuals had taken the floor of the Senate in
Right.
Washington, D.C. And Donna, I also am learning from our newsroom just a moment ago that Governor Asa Hutchinson has tweeted, and Donna, it looks like that tweet came in just about 4 minutes ago.
To see protesters in our nation's capital invading the halls of Congress and disrupting the peaceful transfer of power is reprehensible. That from Governor Asa Hutchinson, and like you said, came in at 2:45 just a few minutes ago. A lot of lawmakers, both Republican and Democrats, are just appalled at what they're seeing. It's interesting because of the 12 or so Republicans, senators who were planning to contest the Electoral College in certain states. I don't know that they were expecting to see all this. And many of them, if not all, are now sequestered. They are on lockdown inside of the Capitol. I have not received word at this point, Mitch, if any of the lawmakers or even the vice president for that matter have been able to make it outside of the Capitol to safety. But we do know that they have been on lockdown for quite some time.
Also worth noting here, and I'm assuming we're NBC and Fox and News Nation, they're working to confirm this now. The Washington Post is, and this right here is a photo from it that NBC captured. It looked like a protester sitting in a lawmaker's chair. The Washington Post just tweeted moments ago that the entire D.C. National Guard has been activated. That's putting 1,100 guardsmen on duty tonight. That is according to a Washington Post defense source of his. And this is all coming at the moment that the U.S. Capitol has been breached, and you see protesters on the steps of the U.S. Capitol. This is video earlier. This is the video that I've been talking about for a little bit now. You see protesters there on the Senate floor.
You know, I went to Twitter and I was looking, speaking of just that, with protesters on the Senate floor, I was looking at the Democrat Gazette on their Twitter page. They were making some statements in regards to all of this, and if you click on the link, you will actually see armed guards, men in suits with guns drawn at protesters. It's just amazing to see. But you know what? I just got another breaking news alert. A joint statement from Democratic leaders Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. We are calling on President Trump to demand that all protesters leave the U.S. Capitol and Capitol grounds immediately. I don't know if that will happen, if what they're asking of the president, but they put that out there.
I'm looking at these photos. This looks like somebody sitting in, that's what, is that the Senate? Sitting in the chair of one of the most respected positions of the United States government.
Well, I mean, I have to be careful how I say this, but what do you expect? They're in there. And of course, they're going to take pictures, they're going to sit, they're going to do the things that we're seeing them do. My question is, how did they get beyond the doors of the Senate floor? How did they get inside? Wasn't there someone to stop that from happening? We do know that armed guards were placed outside of the House floor. So why wasn't the same thing happening with the Senate? The other thing that comes to mind when you think of these senators, these 100 senators, or I guess it would be 98 as it is right now, being that there are 2 in Georgia that aren't there, that will be there eventually, I guess. This has to be the absolute most uncomfortable thing for them, whether you're Democrat or Republican. No matter how you feel about the election, to know that there are people, and some of whom may have guns. You know, that was something that that Capitol Police was really concerned about last night. There were several people who were arrested. Some of them were arrested for carrying weapons. D.C. is not an open carry state. Or Commonwealth, you were not supposed to open carry there. So there were some people breaking the law in terms of that.
Donna, we're just learning, and this is coming from the Associated Press, that the Department of Homeland Security right now is sending additional federal agents to the U.S. Capitol to help stop the violence that is unfolding.
Here's my other question with that. Why is that just now happening? How long has this been going on? Because I just joined you a minute ago.
Sure.
I know as I was driving into work today, I was listening to this on the radio. So, I mean, I guess in the 12 o'clock hour is when the marches started happening toward the Capitol. Would you say that's about accurate?
Yeah, we have seen for most of the morning, at least most of the day, we saw protesters out on the front steps.
Right.
Or not the front steps, excuse me.
Well, outside of the Capitol.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Now that picture that you have up right now, that's the picture that I was referring to that I saw on the Democrat Gazette, where you see these men look like Secret Service with guns drawn.
And you see that looks like a bookshelf or some kind of cabinet.
Like they
right
have
there.
it
They're
barricading
Yeah.
the door. Now maybe that's the House floor. Maybe that's the House floor, and they're unable to get in, which could explain. And of course, this is just speculation.
This is the House floor.
Okay,
this is the
well
House chamber.
Then that may explain why they were able to get into the Senate, because they did not have a barricade as such.
Well, and you see essentially a standoff between federal law enforcement officers. I'm assuming this is U.S. Capitol Police.
I'm thinking that too, but it also could be Secret Service, considering the fact that there are some plainclothes people there. I really don't know. We're making assumptions here. But when you think about this, Mitch, look at how many of them are there versus how many protesters we have seen. And everything that I've read and heard, there are protesters on every floor of the Capitol.
And there you go. This is a different angle.
But there still aren't that many.
No. I want to briefly let folks know and I want to be somewhat careful here because, of course, there's tons of news happening right now. The New York Times is now reporting that, and this has not been independently confirmed by us just yet. We're working to do that, I can only assume, that an explosive device was found at the headquarters of the Republican National Committee in Washington and the nearby headquarters of the Democratic National Committee. Has been evacuated after the discovery of a suspicious package earlier today. And the device was found at the RNC. It was a pipe bomb. It was successfully destroyed by a bomb squad, according to an official for the Republican National Committee. The package at the DNC has not yet been identified just yet. That is what the New York Times is reporting, as we're seeing unprecedented violence unfold in Washington, D.C. The Associated Press now telling us that the White House is reporting that the National Guard troops, along with other federal protective services, are en route to the U.S. Capitol right now. And Donna, you know, this goes back to what we were talking about earlier. We're coming up on 3 o'clock Central Time, 4 o'clock on the East Coast. This is something law enforcement has to get under control rather quickly, especially before nighttime.
And right, you're right. We're coming up on 3 o'clock. Getting back to the bomb scare or the pipe bombs that were located, there have been bomb threats. My question to that is, are there bombs in other places? Obviously, now that's an interesting picture right there, too. It gives you a good perspective on how many people are actually, at one point anyway, outside of the state capitol, the U.S. Capitol, excuse me.
You know, in this right here, I was watching, and there's a driveway in front of the U.S. Capitol that is usually heavily guarded and heavily protected. Usually you'll see elected officials be dropped off there.
Right.
At some point, protesters were able to take that driveway. And at some point, they were able to overtake bicycle police officers that had created a barrier and then storm the steps of the U.S. Capitol this morning and go right up to the front doors of the Capitol. And this is what I'm assuming we're seeing is the front doors.
It looks like it.
To the U.S.
Because from
Capitol.
behind, yeah, you can see those look like Capitol Police security guards outside of the Capitol.
And this is on the east side. So this would be on the House side of the U.S. Capitol. And there they are. You see the Capitol police officers blocking that front door. At some point, they were able to overtake the Capitol police officers and get inside. And this is what you have.
And this is what you have right here. Armed guards with protesters on the floor, spread out, because police have to get this situation under control. Mitch, we have heard from Steve Womack, Arkansas Representative Steve Womack, Rick Crawford, Bruce Westerman. We've heard from Tom Cotton, John Bozeman, Governor Hutchinson, all on Twitter. I have not seen anything from Congressman French Hill. Maybe you have. But all of them saying that this violence has to stop. They are trying to get the message out. Republican lawmakers, Arkansas lawmakers, who want the violence, they want the protesters to leave the Capitol. I don't know that that message is really being heard. Even now, President Trump asking for something very similar to that. But I tell you, at some point, you open the bottle, you let the genie out, and you cannot get her back inside. You just cannot, no matter how much coaxing or how much asking. I mean, it's just gone to a point where how will this end is the question. And for those of us who are following this, we just hope it ends peacefully. We know one person has been shot. You've seen some pictures of what appears to be violent confrontations. And you can't help but wonder how much further this will go.
Happening very soon. We are going to be standing by for President-elect Joe Biden. He will be speaking at least from Delaware, would be my assumption, unless, Donna, the President-elect has been moved. And that is very possible. We don't have any word on that. We do want to get to what NBC is now reporting. NBC is reporting at least one improvised explosive device has been found near the U.S. Capitol. It is not immediately clear where the device was found. Several suspicious packages are now being reported. This is video from earlier today. When you see protesters immediately taking the steps of the U.S. Capitol, you're going to start to see the protesters go up, and we're having an issue with this shot. But at that point, they take the front doors of the Capitol.
Just going through Twitter, I'm coming across a number of things. Fox 5 in Washington, D.C. Tweeted out a picture. A supporter of President Donald Trump sits inside the office of Speaker of the House, Nancy Pelosi. And there is a picture of him. How did he get into her office?
That is the million-dollar question. That is the million-dollar question that I'm sure a lot of people are going to have. We're seeing these photos.
I am pulling up
unfold.
more. I have to be careful with looking through Twitter because, as you know, some of these are actual, and then some of them you just don't know. I don't want to repeat things that may or may not. I am looking at something here where I see a person. I haven't seen anything where a person has been wheeled out on a stretcher with blood. I know a person was shot.
I think
So-
that's what they were talking about, because we heard that for a minute. We heard about the reports coming in
Of the injured person.
Of the injured person.
Well,
and
there is video of that person being wheeled out in a stretcher with what appears to be them pumping oxygen. So the injuries may be quite serious. It looks to be I think it's a woman.
Okay.
Who was injured. Just looking at that picture.
We are looking at these pictures unfold at the U.S. Capitol. We are standing by where we are hearing that President-elect Biden will be speaking very soon, and we are expecting to hear from him related to the protests that we have seen unfold today at the U.S. Capitol. And Donna, important to note here that we had protests here in Arkansas, in Little Rock at our state capitol, that were very peaceful.
Well, you
no
know,
issues at all.
And that happened today. Yeah, around noontime though, they dispersed. I don't know if folks plan to do more protesting at the Arkansas State Capitol tonight, but they were there this morning for the better part of the day up until noon when they started to disperse. But you know, it's quite interesting too, looking at both sides of this. There are some people who are complaining, saying that they used more force to stop protests in downtown Reno than they have in D.C. so far. Many people are dismayed by the fact that this has gone on for so long and that it has been so vast, and it seems to be taking security and other police a long time to really get there to get things under control. Whereas during the Black Lives Matter protests and some of the others, now, you know, looking at both sides of that, we did see with the Black Lives Matter protests where they, in some cities, I believe Wisconsin, they were able, in the state of Wisconsin, they were able to carry on protests for hours without being encumbered, setting a police substation on fire and so on. So, you know, some are complaining though that they feel that there's a double standard happening right now.
I'm going to interrupt you. We have President-elect Joe Biden coming up.
I'm sorry, not just an inconvenience, but I'm sorry for the reason I've delayed coming out to speak to you. I initially was going to talk about the economy, but all of you have been watching what I've been watching. At this hour, our democracy is under an unprecedented assault, unlike anything we've seen in modern times. An assault on the citadel of liberty, the Capitol itself. An assault on the people's representatives, on the Capitol Hill police, sworn to protect them, and the public servants who work at the heart of our republic. An assault on the rule of law like few times we've ever seen it. An assault on the most sacred of American undertakings, the doing of the people's business. Let me be very clear. The scenes of chaos at the Capitol do not reflect a true America, do not represent who we are. What we're seeing are a small number of extremists dedicated to lawlessness. This is not dissent. It's disorder. It's chaos. It borders on sedition. And it must end now. I call on this mob to pull back and allow the work of democracy to go forward. You've heard me say before in different contexts, the words of a president matter, no matter how good or bad that president is. At their best, the words of a president can inspire. at their worst, they can incite. And therefore, I call on President Trump to go on national television now to fulfill his oath and defend the Constitution and demand an end to this siege, to storm the Capitol, to smash windows, to occupy offices, the floor of the United States Senate, rummaging through desks, on the Capitol, on the House of Representatives, threatening the safety of duly elected officials. It's not protest, it's insurrection. The world's watching. Like so many other Americans, I am genuinely shocked and saddened that our nation, so long the beacon of light and hope for democracy, has come to such a dark moment. Through war and strife, America's endured much. And we will endure here, and we will prevail again, and will prevail now. The work of the moment and the work of the next 4 years must be the restoration of democracy, of decency, honor, respect, the rule of law, just plain, simple decency. The renewal of the politics. It's about solving problems, looking out for one another, not stoking the flames of hate and chaos. As I said, America's about honor, decency, respect, tolerance. That's who we are. That's who we've always been. The certification of the Electoral College vote is supposed to be a sacred ritual, which we affirm. The purpose is to affirm the majesty of American democracy. But today's reminder, a painful one, that democracy is fragile, and to preserve it requires people of goodwill, leaders with the courage to stand up, who are devoted not to the pursuit of power, or the personal interest pursuits of their own selfish interest at any cost, but of the common good. Think what our children watching television are thinking. Think what the rest of the world is looking at. For nearly 2.5 centuries, we, the people, in search of a more perfect union, have kept our eyes on that common good. America is so much better than what we've seen today. Watching the scenes from the Capitol, I was reminded, as I prepared other speeches in the past, I was reminded of the words of Abraham Lincoln in his annual message to Congress, whose work has today been interrupted by chaos. Here's what Lincoln said. He said, "We shall nobly save or merely lose the last best hope on earth." Went on to say, "The way is plain, peaceful, generous, just. A way which, if followed, the world will forever applaud and God must forever bless." The way is plain here, too. That's who we are. It's the way of democracy, of respect, of decency, of honor, and commitment as patriots to this nation. Notwithstanding what I saw today and we're seeing today, I remain optimistic about the incredible opportunities. There has never been anything we can't do when we do it together. And this god-awful display today is bringing home to every Republican and Democrat and Independent in the nation that we must step up. This is the United States of America. There's never, ever, 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 ever been a thing we've tried to do that we've done it together. We've not been able to do it. So, President Trump, step up. May God bless America. May God protect our troops and all those folks at the Capitol who are trying to preserve order. Thank you, and I'm sorry to have kept you waiting.
There is President-elect Joe Biden speaking just a few moments ago in Delaware as he calls the attack on the U.S. Capitol a siege. As we now know it, the National Guard has been deployed to the U.S. Capitol in Washington, D.C. Donna.
Yeah, of course, criticizing what he called the assault on the people's representatives, an assault on the rule of law, and an assault on the sacred American undertaking of doing America's business. And he also said that this does not reflect America. It's just a small number of people. As we watch this, it seems, of course, like a very, very large number of people. But I guess if you put that into perspective, he refers to it as a small number of people, and it does not reflect America. But he did ask the president point blank to go on national TV and demand an end to this siege. And he's asking President Trump to step up. It's quite interesting, though, as we look at what's going on at our nation's capital. We just got word that Jon Ossoff is the projected winner, Democrat Jon Ossoff, the projected winner of the Senate seat in Georgia, that remaining Senate seat in Georgia. He beat out David Perdue, both NBC News, CBS News, naming him the projected winner. So now you have two Democrats in Georgia, in a state that has been highly, highly Republican over decades, now appearing to go blue, both voting in Joe Biden as president, as well as these two politicians to the Senate. And you know, Mitch, you said something interesting. You said, I wonder how the protesters will react to that, which is quite interesting. And I don't know that that's really on their agenda right now. Their biggest thing is
they may not know yet
that's
at the
true.
U.S. Capitol.
I mean, but you know, you would think they all have phones and they're, you know, in tune to what's going on. But I think their real focus right now is keeping President Donald Trump in office. That's their primary focus. And I think there might also be excitement in the fact that they are in the Capitol, they are in the chambers, and, you know, as I mentioned before, sitting in Nancy Pelosi's office. We've seen pictures of that.
We have, and we continue to see pictures from the U.S. Capitol at this very hour with protesters there on the steps. If you're just joining us, we are going to prepare to wrap up here, but let's just quickly recap what we know at this very hour. At approximately 1:30 Central Time today, protesters managed to get as close as ever to the building, the state capitol. Eventually they were able to take the steps, and then eventually they were able to breach the front doors of the U.S. Capitol and take siege of it. We've seen photos circulating of people there on the House floor and the Senate floor sitting in seats. Donna, that iconic photo that's probably going to go down in the history books of U.S. Capitol police officers barricading themselves inside the House chambers using what appeared to be a bookshelf of some kind and what was an armed standoff with U.S.
drawn.
Capitol police officers. Yeah.
Right. And lawmakers being told to shelter in place. There was also talk of using tear gas on some of the protesters, and lawmakers were given gas masks in case that would happen. We have seen pictures of protesters sprawled on the floor with Capitol Police pointing their guns at them. I mean, this has really been absolutely remarkable and something that this country has never seen before. Vice President Pence, who was presiding over this process, had to be taken away. We never got official word, though, if he was actually removed from the Capitol building. It's kind of hard to get Vice President Pence as well as lawmakers out of the Capitol, being that it's surrounded by protesters.
Right, and the entire building blocked, and you have protesters there. You know, one can only imagine where Vice President Mike Pence is. And you know, it was interesting. He sent a letter to Congress, basically saying that he's going to have to uphold his constitutional duty. And it would be interesting to see the timeline. I know the letter was issued around noon, and it was within at least an hour or so we started to see protesters take the steps at the Capitol.
Right, and it wasn't long after the whole process started inside of the Capitol that President Donald Trump actually sent out a tweet criticizing Vice President Mike Pence for saying that he was basically going to do his job. And really, Mitch, there's not a whole lot he could do to reverse the Electoral College. His job is to preside over it, keep it orderly, and to move on so that lawmakers can count the votes. The question now is, when will they get to do that? Because today, legally and by constitutional law, today is the day that this is supposed to happen, that lawmakers are basically supposed to sign off on the Electoral College. And with everything that's going on, I can't imagine them going back in session today. So what happens? The country has never experienced anything like this before. This is so out of the ordinary. So is there something in the Constitution that actually says, well, if protesters take over the Capitol building and for some reason you're unable to carry out the duties, you know, you can come back tomorrow and do this? I'm sure they'll figure all that out, but there are just so many unanswered questions. The other thing, Mitch, that many people, many of us observers, news people, media covering this, we're wondering how this ends, because it's not over yet by any stretch of the imagination. So, you know,
it's not, Donna, and it's about to get more interesting
as it gets dark.
Right now, moments ago, the President of the United States has recorded a message. Let's go ahead and see if we can play that.
The other side.
Here we go. Hold on, just one moment. We're gonna.
We have to have peace.
Back it up a little bit.
Yeah, we're gonna back that up. Again, this is a tweet just coming in from the president as we.
It's 1 minute long.
1 minute long, and here we go. A recorded message from the president just moments ago.
I know your pain. I know you're hurt. We had an election that was stolen from us. It was a landslide election, and everyone knows it, especially the other side. But you have to go home now. We have to have peace. We have to have law and order. We have to respect our great people in law and order. We don't want anybody hurt. It's a very tough period of time. There's never been a time like this where such a thing happened, where they could take it away from all of us. From me, from you, from our country. This was a fraudulent election, but we can't play into the hands of these people. We have to have peace. So go home. We love you. You're very special. You've seen what happens. You see the way others are treated that are so bad and so evil. I know how you feel, but go home and go home in peace.
There you have it, President Donald Trump on Twitter asking the protesters to go home in peace. Still saying that the election was stolen.
Did not concede.
And not conceding. There are some people who will argue that the election was not stolen. We've heard the back and forth. I'll let you decide on whether you feel it was stolen or whether you feel it was not stolen. But the president asking his supporters at the nation's capital as we speak to go home. So will they do that is the question. And like I said earlier, you let the genie out of the bottle. How do you get her back in? Is it possible for this to end as peacefully as we would like, where folks just walk out of the building and say, okay, we're going to go home now? Many of them are revved up, and who knows how this will end. We hope it does end peacefully.
And that was the president. So we've now heard from President-elect Joe Biden, who called this an assault on democracy. calling on President Trump to speak on national TV now and fulfill his oath. Minutes ago, we heard from President Trump telling people go home, have law and order,
and Majority
not
Leader
conceding to the election.
Majority Leader Mitch McConnell, in a tweet, rebuked the idea that there was any election fraud. So we hear of election fraud. Many people feel as though there was. And like I said, I will let folks decide for themselves, but you have the Majority Leader of the Senate, Republican Mitch McConnell, saying that there was no election fraud.
That is the very latest from KRK and Fox 16. We continue to watch these unprecedented events unfold in our nation's capital, the United States Capitol, under siege by protesters. As we continue to see protesters on the grounds of the state capitol. We'll have much more on this breaking news story coming up on KRK4 News at 4. Of course, Fox 16 News at 5:30. Our websites, krk.com and fox16.com. Download our mobile phone app as we continue to monitor and follow this breaking news situation in Washington, D.C. For now, I'm Mitch McCoy.
And I'm Donna Terrell.
Have a good afternoon.
So long, everybody.